They say the forest doesn't take people. It calls them slowly, quietly, by name. And if you hear in the rain, it's already too late. Before you fall asleep and forget, tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it there? I ask because the whispers choose their moment carefully. And I need to know who's still awake. Comment now, before the rain starts calling you too. Now listen closely, because what I'm about to tell you might explain why you've been hearing your name in the dark. I've never told anyone this story before. Not properly, at least. Perhaps it's the sound of the rain outside that's given me the courage to finally speak about what happened to me 5 years ago in the Black Hills of South Dakota. There's something oddly comforting about the patter of raindrops against a window, isn't there? A reminder that we're safe inside, separated from the wilderness beyond our walls. At least, that's what we tell ourselves. Do you ever wonder what truly lurks in those ancient forests? What watches us when we believe we're alone? I used to be an avid camper. Every summer, I'd venture out to a different national park. Yellowstone, Yosemite, the Grand Canyon. Anywhere I could pitch a tent and lose myself beneath the stars. It was my escape from the crushing monotony of office life in London. 2 weeks each year where I could breathe properly. But after what happened in the Black Hills, I haven't gone camping since. I haven't even slept with my window open, rain or no rain. It was meant to be just another adventure. My American colleague Daniel had suggested the trip when he learned I'd be in the States for a conference. The Black Hills are mystical, he'd said, sacred to the Lakota. You love it. He couldn't join me. Family emergency, he'd explained, but insisted I shouldn't miss the opportunity. He lent me his equipment, a spacious tent, sleeping bag, portable stove, the works. I remember how he'd hesitated before handing over his battered compass. Stay on the marked trails, he'd advised, uncharacteristically serious. The hills have a way of disorientating people. I'd laugh it off. I was experienced. I'd hiked through the Scottish Highlands alone, navigated the Lake District in dense fog. What challenge was from American woodland possibly present? Arrogance. That's what nearly killed me. I arrived at the campsite in early September. The tourist season was winding down, and I relished the relative quiet. There were only a handful of other campers scattered across the grounds, mostly older couples in caravans. I selected a spot at the edge of the designated area, closer to the tree-line than the others. I wanted to feel immersed in nature, not surrounded by people. The first 2 days were glorious. I hiked established trails during daylight hours, marveling at the peculiar rock formations and the dense ponderosa pines that seemed to whisper as the wind moved through them. In the evenings, I'd cook a simple meal on Daniel's portable stove and sit watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. On the third day, it rained, not the gentle patter we're hearing now, but a proper deluge. I stayed in my tent reading until mid-afternoon when the skies finally cleared. Restless from being confined, I decided to take a short hike before dusk. Just going for a walk, I told the campsite manager, a weathered man named Jim, back before dark. He glanced at the sky, frowning. Storm's not done yet, and these trails get slippery after rain. I'll stick to the easy ones, I promise. Just need to stretch my legs. Jim nodded reluctantly. Keep your phone charged and stay on Lookout Trail. It loops back in 3 miles. I followed his advice at first. Lookout Trail was well maintained, with wooden boardwalks over the wetter sections. About a mile in, I noticed a narrow dirt path branching off between 2 large boulders. It wasn't marked on my trail map, but it looked well-trodden enough. Curiosity got the better of me. Just a quick detour, I told myself. I'll turn back if it gets too muddy. The path led deeper into the forest, where the pines grew so dense that they blocked out much of the fading daylight. The air felt different here, heavier, somehow charged. I told myself it was just the lingering humidity from the rain, but even then, I knew it was something more. Have you ever felt watched by something you couldn't see? That prickling sensation on the back of your neck? That's what I felt with every step I took along that unmarked path. After 20 minutes of walking, I realized I'd gone too far. The sun was sinking rapidly, and the forest was growing darker by the minute. I turned to head back the way I'd come, but nothing looked familiar. The path I'd been following seemed to have vanished. I pulled out my phone. No signal, of course. I tried using the compass app, but it spun wildly, never settling on a direction. Then I remembered Daniel's compass in my pocket. I took it out, but to my horror, it was doing the same thing. The needle spinning rapidly as if pulled by multiple magnetic fields. That's when the first drops of rain began to fall. Within minutes, it was pouring again, harder than before. The forest canopy provided some shelter, but I was quickly becoming soaked and increasingly disoriented. Every direction looked the same. Endless trees disappearing into growing darkness. My heart began racing. I tried to control my breathing, to think logically. Downhill, I thought. Water flows downhill. Find a stream. Follow it to civilization. Basic survival training. I started walking again, trying to maintain a straight line. The rain intensified, drumming against the leaves above. It would have been soothing under different circumstances, like it is now as we sit here. But out there, alone, it was anything but comforting. As the last of the daylight faded, I had to switch on my torch. Its beam seemed feeble against the vast darkness, creating more shadows and illumination. I stumbled on, my boots sinking into the increasingly muddy ground. That's when I heard it for the first time. A voice carried on the wind and rain. At first, I thought it was just water rushing somewhere nearby. But then it came again, clearer this time. My name. Something whispered my name. I froze, my torch beam shaking across the trees before me. Hello. I called out, my voice sounding pathetically small. Is someone there? Nothing but the rain answered me. I convinced myself I'd imagined it, that it was just the wind playing tricks. I pressed on, moving faster now, no longer caring about direction, just wanted to find my way out of those endless trees. Then I saw the light, a faint glow between the trees ahead, steady and yellow, like a campfire or a cabin window. Relief washed over me. Civilization. Help. I hurried toward it, stumbling over roots and rocks, my torch bobbing wildly. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a campfire or cabin at all. It was a lantern, old-fashioned and oil-burning, sitting on a flat rock in a small clearing. I approached it cautiously. Who would leave a lit lantern in the middle of the forest during a rainstorm? It didn't make sense. Yet there it was, its flame protected from the rain by the glass chimney, burning steadily as if recently lit. Hello? I called again, louder this time. I'm lost. Can anyone help me? The forest seemed to go completely silent. Even the rain sounded muffled suddenly, as if someone had turned down the volume of the world. Then I noticed the carvings on the rock beneath the lantern, strange symbols, spirals, and what looked like crude animal figures. They seemed old, weathered by time, yet the grooves glistened as if freshly cut. I leaned closer, fascinated despite my fear. My fingers reached out, almost of their own accord, to trace one of the spirals. I wouldn't touch that if I were you. The voice nearly stopped my heart. I spun around, torch beam wildly scanning the trees. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing. Tall, lean, dressed in what looked like a park ranger uniform. Relief flooded through me. Thank God, I gasped. I've been lost for hours. The compass wouldn't work, and my phone. The hills disorient people sometimes, the ranger interrupted, stepping forward. In the combined glow of my torch and lantern, I could see his face better. He was older than I had first thought, perhaps in his 60s, with deeply tanned skin creased by the elements. His eyes reflected the lantern light oddly, seeming almost aglow. "I'm Ranger Walker," he said, though I noted there was no name badge on his uniform. "You're a long way from the marked trails." I took a detour, I admitted sheepishly. Then the rain started again and I got turned around. He nodded as if this was a common occurrence. "The rain brings them closer to our world," he said cryptically. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with my wet clothes. "Brings what closer?" Ranger Walker didn't answer directly. Instead, he gestured to the lantern. "That's not mine. I've been tracking it for 3 nights now." I frowned, confusion replacing relief. "What do you mean, tracking it? It's a lantern. Someone must have left it here." "Is that what you think?" There was something unsettling in his tone, almost mocking. "Look again." I turned back to the lantern and my blood froze. It was no longer on the rock. It was now hanging from a low branch several feet away. "That's not possible," I whispered, backing away. I was looking right at it. "The hills play tricks on visitors," Ranger Walker said, still unnervingly calm, "especially those who wander off the path." My mind raced for a rational explanation. "You moved it," I accused, while I was turned away. He smiled thinly. "I've been standing right here." As at the punctuated statement, the lantern flickered and was suddenly hanging from a different branch, further away, deeper into the trees. "What the hell is happening?" My voice cracked with fear. "They're called wisp lights," Ranger Walker explained. "The Lakota have other names for them. They lead travelers astray. Those who follow them too far don't come back." I looked from him to the lantern, which seemed to sway slightly, though there was no breeze. "I don't understand." "You're not meant to." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something that gleamed dully in the light of my torch. A silver whistle. "Some things in these hills are older than human understanding. They were here before us, and they'll be here long after we're gone." My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Are you gonna help me get back to the campsite or not?" Ranger Walker studied me for a long moment. "That depends," he finally said. "On what? On whether you're still you." A chill shot down my spine. "What are you talking about?" Instead of answering, he raised the whistle to his lips and blew. I heard nothing, no sound emerged, but I felt something, a vibration in the air that seemed to pass through my body like a wave. The lantern went out. In the sudden darkness, illuminated only by my torch, I saw Ranger Walker's face change. His expression hardened as he stared at me. "What did you see?" he demanded. "When the whistle blew, what did you see?" "Nothing," I stammered. "I didn't hear anything." "Not here. See." He took a step toward me. "If you were one of them, you have seen the true nature of things for a moment," the whistle reveals. I was beginning to think the ranger was unhinged. I needed to get away from him, find my own way back. "Look, I appreciate your concern, but I really need to get back to the campsite. If you could just point me in the right direction." You didn't answer my question, he interrupted, his voice suddenly harsh. What did you see when I blew the whistle? Nothing. I insisted, fear making me angry. I saw absolutely nothing except you acting like a lunatic in the middle of a forest during a rainstorm. He studied me for a long moment. Then his posture relaxed slightly. Good, he muttered. That's good. Before I could respond, a sound came from the darkness behind me. A soft, rhythmic clicking, like stone tapping against stone. I spun around, torch beam cutting through the rain. There was nothing there, but the sound continued, moving now, circling us. Don't run, Ranger Walker said quietly. Whatever happens, don't run. The clicking grew louder, coming from multiple directions now. I turned in a slow circle. Torch beams sweeping the tree around the clearing. The rain seemed to be falling harder, limiting visibility to just a few meters. What is that? I whispered. The ones who follow the lights, he replied. The lost ones. As he spoke, my torch beam caught something moving between the trees. A figure, human-shaped but wrong somehow. It moved with an unnatural gait, jerky and too quick. Before I could focus on it, it was gone, melting back into the darkness. Another appeared to my right, closer this time. In the brief moment my light found it, I saw what looked like a man in hiking clothes, but his movements were marionette-like, his head tilted at an impossible angle. Then he too vanished. They're drawing power from it, Ranger Walker said. Electronics fail around them. On cue, my torch died completely. The darkness was absolute, broken only by occasional flashes of lightning that illuminated the clearing in frozen tableaus of terror. In those strobing moments, I caught glimpses of figures at the edge of the trees, 5, maybe 6 of them, standing perfectly still, watching us. Do you know what true fear feels like? It's not just your heart racing or adrenaline pumping. It's a different state of consciousness entirely. Your mind fragments. Part of you detaches, watches from above as your body trembles and your breath comes in ragged gasps. Time stretches and contracts. Every sense heightens to the point of pain. That's where I was in that moment. Suspended in pure, distilled fear. Give me your hand, Ranger Walker commanded, his voice eerily calm. I hesitated, then felt his cold fingers wrap around my wrist. He pressed something small and hard into my palm, a stone of some kind. Keep this with you. Don't let go of it, no matter what. Lightning flashed again. The figures were closer now, arranged in a circle around us. In that brief illumination, I saw their faces, or rather, the absence of faces. Where features should have been, there were only smooth, blank expanses of skin, like unfinished sculptures. I bit back a scream. They can't cross the circle, Ranger Walker said. Not unless we break it. I looked down. In the next lightning flash, I saw that we were standing within a circle of small white stones, similar to the one now clutched in my hand. I hadn't noticed them before, hadn't seen Ranger Walker place them. Had they always been there? What are they? I managed to ask, my voice barely audible over the rain. They were people once, he replied. Hikers, campers, locals. They followed the lights too far, stayed too long. Another flash. The figures had moved again, still maintaining their circle but pressing closer to the invisible boundary of stones. One stood directly in front of me, not 3 meters away. Though it had no eyes, I could feel it staring, studying, hungering. How do we get past them? I whispered. We don't, Ranger Walker said. We wait. For what? Dawn, They retreat with the first light. The thought of spending an entire night in that clearing, surrounded by those things, sent a fresh wave of panic through me. That's hours away. My torch is dead. We have no shelter. No. They're testing you, he interrupted. Feeding on your fear. Control it. Easy for him to say. He'd clearly done this before. For me, it was like being told not to breathe. Lightning flashed again, longer this time, illuminating the scene in stuttering pulses. The figures were moving now, circling us, their movements jerky and uncoordinated like damaged film footage. The clicking sounds grew louder, more insistent. And then, between thunderclaps, I heard my name again, whispered, just as before, but now from multiple voices, layered and echoing. They know your name, Ranger Walker said quietly. Did you tell it to the lights? I shook my head, then realized he couldn't see me in the darkness. No, I said, but I heard my name before in the forest, before I found the lantern. He was silent for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, become more urgent. The stone I gave you, what does it feel like? I closed my fingers around it. Small, smooth, cold. Is it warming in your hand? I concentrated on the sensation. No, still cold. Another pause. It should be warming, he said. And now there was something like fear in his voice the first time. Unless lightning split the sky, thunder following almost instantly. In that moment of illumination, I saw Ranger Walker clearly. He was looking not at the figures surrounding us, but at me, his expression one of dawning realization and horror. When did you first hear your name called? He asked. I told you in the forest before. How long before? How long were you lost before you heard it? I tried to think back, to piece together the disjointed timeline. I don't know. An hour? Maybe 2. He took a step back from me, still within the circle of stones, but now as far from me as the boundary would allow. And the compass, he said. You said it didn't work. When did it stop working? Right after I left the marked trail. I said, confusion and fear making it hard to concentrate. Why does that matter now? In answer, he raised the silver whistle to his lips again and blew. As before, I heard nothing. But this time, something happened. The world shifted. There's no other way to describe it. Colors inverted, sounds muted. And I could suddenly see clearly despite the darkness. The trees around us glowed with a faint bluish light. The rain hung suspended in midair, droplets frozen like glass beads. And the figures beyond our stone circle were no longer human-shaped. They were tall, spindly things with too many joints. Their bodies composed of what looked like interwoven branches and sinew. Where heads should have been, they had bulbous growths covered in what I can only describe as eyes. Dozens of them blinking in unison. The vision lasted only seconds before the world snapped back to normal, or what had passed for normal in that clearing. Darkness returned, along with the sound of rain and thunder. But now I could still see the creatures, their true forms superimposed over their human disguises like a double exposure photograph. The revelation wasn't limited to them. I could see other things too. Symbols glowing in the air, patterns in the arrangement of trees, currents of energy flowing to the ground beneath us. And I could see Ranger Walker clearly now, despite the darkness. See what he truly was. Not human. Never human. He saw the recognition in my eyes. You shouldn't have been able to see, he said, his voice different now, layered, like multiple voices speaking in unison. The whistle doesn't work on humans. My mind reeled. I am human, I insisted, though even as I said it, Doubt crept in. If I could see what the whistle revealed. When did you last eat? He asked suddenly. Or drink? Or sleep? Do you remember? I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped. I couldn't remember. I had clear memories of the conference, of meeting Daniel, of arriving at the campsite. But after that, things became blurry. Had I eaten at my campsite? Slept in my tent? I must have, but I couldn't summon specific memories of doing so. What's happening to me? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. You followed the lights, he said simply. You've been following them for days. That's not possible. I only left the trail this afternoon. Time moves differently for those who walk with the lights. The campsite manager reported you missing 4 days ago. For days? It couldn't be true. And yet, hadn't Daniel warned me about the hills disorienting people? If I've been missing that long, why are you only finding me now? I challenged. Who says this is the first time I found you? Ranger Walker replied. A chill ran through me. Before I could respond, one of the creatures beyond our circle made a sound. Not the clicking from before, but a high, keening cry that seemed to pierce directly into my brain. The others took it up, creating a discordant chorus that made me clutch my head in pain. They're growing impatient, Ranger Walker, or whatever he was, said. They know what you are becoming. And what's that? I asked, though I feared I already knew the answer. One of them, neither here nor there, caught between worlds. The stone in my hand suddenly felt heavier, drawing my attention to it. I opened my palm. In the next flash of lightning, I saw it wasn't a stone at all, but a small carving, similar to those I'd seen on the rock beneath the lantern. A spiral within a spiral, cut from some dark material. That won't protect you anymore, Ranger Walker said, noticing my discovery. It would have once, when enough of you was still human. The creature's cries grew louder. I could feel their hunger now, their desperate need to take what remained of my humanity. And part of me, a growing part, wanted to join them. There must be something you can do, I pleaded, some way to reverse this. Ranger Walker was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, there is one way, but it requires sacrifice. Anything, I said quickly. I'll do anything. Not your sacrifice, he clarified. Mine. Before I could process his words, he reached down and broke the circle of stones, kicking one away into the darkness. The effect was immediate. The keening stopped. The rain seemed to pause. Even the thunder and lightning held their breath. Ranger Walker turned to me. Run, he said. When they take me, run toward the rising sun. Don't stop, don't look back. If you reach the main trail before dawn, you might still return to your world. And if I don't, then the next ranger will find you leading travelers astray with your lantern. His form began to shimmer, like heat rising from pavement. The hills demand balance, a soul for soul. The creatures rushed forward, no longer held back by the broken circle. They ignored me completely, converging on Ranger Walker. In seconds, he was obscured by their twisted forms. I ran through the forest, blind in the darkness, guided only by occasional lightning and some new sense that had awakened within me, a sensitivity to the energies flowing through the hills. I could feel the direction of the rising sun, even though it was hours from dawn. East, safety, humanity, behind me. Ranger Walker's screams echoed through the trees, inhuman sound of agony that no human throat could produce. I didn't look back. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to give out. Then I ran some more, I don't know how long I ran. Time had lost all meaning in the hills. But eventually, I broke through the tree and found myself on a wide gravel path. The main trail, illuminated by the first gray light of dawn. I collapsed there, gasping for breath, feeling the strange energies that had been building within me drain away with each ray of sunlight that filtered through the clouds. The rain had stopped. The world felt normal again. A search party found me an hour later. Park rangers, local police, volunteers. They told me I'd been missing for nearly 5 days. My campsite had been undisturbed. Tent still pitched, belongings inside, as if I'd simply walked away. When I tried to explain what had happened, about Ranger Walker and the creatures, the real rangers exchanged glances. There was no Ranger Walker employed at Black Hills National Forest. They said, never had been, and the area where I claimed to have spent the night didn't exist on any of their maps. The official report listed me as another disorientated hiker, suffering from dehydration and exposure. A common enough occurrence in the hills, apparently. No one questioned it, but I know what I experienced. And sometimes in my dreams, I still hear those clicking sounds. Still see those faceless figures watching from the trees. Still feel the pull of the lantern's light, calling me back to the hills. I keep the spiral carving with me always now. It's warm since that night, no longer cold to touch. Sometimes I catch it glowing faintly in the darkness of my bedroom. A reminder, a warning, a connection to something I nearly became. Is it still raining where you are? Listen to it carefully. There are whispers in the rain, if you know how to hear them. Names being called. Yours might be among them. And if you ever find yourself in the Black Hills, stick to the marked trails. If you see a light between the trees, walk the other way. And if someone calls your name from the darkness, don't answer. Don't ever answer. The rain's been falling steadily for hours now. It reminds me of that night 5 years ago. I suppose that's why I'm finally telling this story. The sound of water tapping against glass always brings it all back. Do you ever find that certain weather awakens memories you'd rather keep buried? There's something about rainfall that thins the veil between now and then, isn't there? I was working as a geological surveyor back then. Good money. Interesting work, though it often took me to remote locations. This particular assignment had me documenting cave formations in the northern reaches of Wales, a small system of limestone caverns largely unexplored since a brief archaeological dig in the 1970s. Nothing terribly exciting on paper, just routine measurements and sample collections for a university research project. I'd rented a small cottage, about 20 minutes drive from the cave entrance. Quaint little place. Stone walls, thatched roof, the sort of holiday accommodation that shows up on postcards. Deceptively charming, as it turned out. The locals in the village nearby seemed pleasant enough, though somewhat reserved whenever I mentioned my work at the caves. I attributed it to the usual rural suspicion of outsiders. You've encountered that too, haven't you? That subtle shift when you mention you're just passing through? My first 3 days at the cave site were uneventful. I'd arrive early morning, work until dusk, then return to the cottage. The cave system wasn't particularly extensive. A main chamber with 4 smaller offshoots, nothing deeper than about 200 meters. I'd nearly finished my survey work when the weather turned. The forecast had mentioned light showers, but what arrived instead was a proper deluge. I considered packing up early that 4th day when the rain began, but I had just one section left to document. A narrow passage leading off the eastern wall of the main chamber. My predecessor's notes have been oddly incomplete about this particular tunnel, marking it simply as unexplored potential instability. Protocol dictated I should at least assess it visually, even if a full exploration wasn't feasible. The passage was tight, barely wide enough for my shoulders, and descended at a sharp angle. I shone my torch ahead, seeing nothing but more tunnels stretching deeper into the earth. The rock here was different, darker, with peculiar striations I hadn't observed elsewhere in the system. Interesting enough that I decided to venture a bit further than perhaps was wise. After about 15 meters, the passage widened abruptly into a small chamber, roughly circular and about 5 meters in diameter. My torch beam revealed walls covering what I initially took to be mineral deposits, crystalline structures that caught the light and threw it back in prismatic patterns. Beautiful, really, but as I moved closer to examine them, I realized they weren't natural formations at all. They were carvings, hundreds of tiny, intricate symbols etched into the rock face, arranged in concentric circles. Some resembled letters from alphabets I couldn't identify. Others were pictographic, stylized human figures, astronomical symbols, and recurring spiral patterns. I'm not an archaeologist, but even I knew this was a significant find. I began photographing everything, careful not to touch the carvings. That's when I first noticed the acoustic properties of the chamber. Each small sound I made, the click of my camera, the scuff of my boot, returned with peculiar delay, as if the echo were traveling much farther than the confines of this small space should allow. Curious, I cleared my throat and spoke aloud. Hello? The echo came back, but not immediately. 3, perhaps 4 seconds passed before I heard it. Longer than physically possible given the chamber's dimensions. And when it did return, it wasn't quite right. Not distorted exactly, but altered. The syllables stretched, with a subtle change in pitch. I told myself it was simply an unusual acoustic phenomenon. Caves often have strange sound properties. Nothing to be concerned about. I continued documenting the chamber, moving methodically around its circumference. Near the far wall, opposite the entrance passage, I found what appeared to be a natural shelf in the rock, upon which sat several objects. A small ceramic bowl, blackened as if by fire. 3 stones arranged in a triangle, each carved with one of the symbols from the walls. And most strangely, what looked like a hand mirror made of polished obsidian, its handle wrapped in some kind of preserved animal sinew. These were artifacts, not geological features. Human-made objects that, by their appearance, had been there for centuries at least. I should have left them untouched, reported the find to the proper authorities. That would have been the professional thing to do. Instead, I picked up the mirror. The obsidian was surprisingly warm to the touch, and heavier than it looked. Its surface was so perfectly polished that it seemed to absorb my torch beam rather than reflect it. I angled it, trying to catch my reflection, but saw only darkness in its surface. A darkness that seemed somehow deeper than mere absence of light. And then it spoke, not with a voice, not exactly. It was more like thoughts inserted directly into my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. A whisper that originated inside my own head. Who comes? Who disturbs? I nearly dropped the mirror in shock. My rational mind immediately supplied explanations. Exhaustion, perhaps the beginning of migraine, or maybe carbon dioxide levels in this deep chamber affecting my cognition. I'd heard of cavers hallucinating due to poor air quality, but then it came again, clearer this time. You are heard. You are seen. Name yourself. This isn't real, I said aloud, my voice shaking. The words echoed in that same strange, delayed fashion, coming back wrong, transformed into sounds that almost, but not quite, resembled my original statement. Real? What is real? The surface world is illusion. Here is truth. Here is memory. Name yourself, surface dweller. My hands were trembling now. I should have put the mirror down. Left the chamber immediately. Something was very wrong, either with the air in the cave or with my own perception. But I didn't leave. A terrible curiosity had taken hold of me. My name is Thomas Harwick, I said, addressing the mirror directly now. Who were you? The delay seemed longer this time before my echo returned. But when it did, it wasn't my voice at all. It was something using the acoustic properties of the chamber to form words. Words that sounded like they'd been assembled from fragments of my own speech, recombined and altered. Thomas Harwick. Thomas. We remember this name. We have heard it before. A chill ran through me. That's not possible. I've never been here before. Time is circular. What will be has been. What has been will be again. Thomas Harwick has spoken to us before. Will speak to us again. Outside, miles above us, thunder cracked, so powerful that I felt the vibration even this deep underground. Small fragments of limestone dislodged from the ceiling, pattering around me like the first warning of a cave-in. I needed to leave. Now, but as I turned toward the passage, torch beams swinging wildly across the carved walls, I saw that the symbols were moving, rearranging themselves, flowing like liquid across the stone surface, forming new patterns, new messages. Not yet. The voice that wasn't a voice said, "The storm comes. The way thins. Speak with us a while, Thomas Harwick." "I have to go," I insisted, backing toward the tunnel entrance. "The cave might be flooding. It's not safe. Safety is illusion. Remain. Learn. Remember." Another crash of thunder, closer this time. The ground beneath my feet trembled, and suddenly, horribly, I could hear water, fast-moving water, somewhere in the tunnel system. The storm must have been even more severe than I'd realized. Flash flooding in caves is a death sentence. I lunged to the passage, but as I reached it, my torch beam revealed that it was already filling with water, a dark, rushing torrent pouring down from the main chamber. There would be no escape that way. I was trapped. "There must be another way out," I said, my voice high and tight with rising panic. "Another passage." "There is no way out," the voice replied, almost gently. "There's only the way in. Deeper, further, beyond." The water was beginning to spill into the chamber now, swirling around my boots. Cold, so cold it burned. I scrambled backward, seeking higher ground, but the chamber floor was depressingly uniform. Within minutes, the water would fill this space entirely. In desperation, I shone my torch around the chamber once more, searching for any feature I might have missed, a crevice, an opening, anything. The beam caught the obsidian mirror, which I dropped in my panic. It lay half submerged now, the dark water seeming to flow both into and out of its surface, as if the mirror were both reflecting the flood and somehow generating it. And I understood then, with a clarity that defied rational explanation, that the mirror was a door, a threshold, a way through. The water had reached my knees, numbing my legs with its icy embrace. My torch flickered, once, twice, then went out, plunging me into absolute darkness. No, not absolute. There was a faint glow coming from the mirror, a deep purple luminescence that seemed to pulse in rhythm with my racing heart. "Choose," the voice said, no longer in my head, but seeming to come from the very walls around me. "Drown in the waters of your world, or step through into ours." "This isn't real," I said again, but with less conviction. The water had reached my waist, and I could no longer feel my legs at all. This is a hallucination. Carbon dioxide poisoning, or reality is consensus. The voice interrupted. Your consensus is breaking. Ours is strengthening. Choose quickly, Thomas Harwick. The threshold weakens with the storm. The water had reached my chest, forcing me to tilt my head back to keep my face above the surface. In the mirror's purple glow, I could see the carved symbols from the walls now floating freely in the water around me, three-dimensional and luminous, spinning and combining in impossible configurations. I had seconds left at most. Choose, the voice insisted. And God help me, I did. I took a deep breath, pushed off from the chamber floor, and swam toward the mirror. Its glow brightened as I approached, pulsing faster. The water around it seemed to bend and distort, as if being sucked into an invisible drain. As my fingers touched its surface, I expected to feel solid obsidian. Instead, they passed through, encountering resistance like thick syrup, but not solidity. The sensation extended up my arm as I pushed further, an electric tingling that wasn't quite painful, but wasn't pleasant either. With the last of my breath burning in my lungs, I forced my head and shoulders through the mirror's surface and emerged somewhere else entirely. I won't describe what I saw on the other side. Can't describe it, really. Human language lacks the vocabulary for that place. Those beings, those laws of physics that aren't our own. I retain only fragments, impressions, colors that don't exist in our spectrum, geometries that shouldn't be possible, entities composed of thought rather than matter. What I will say is that I wasn't alone there. Others had passed through before me. Some recently, some centuries ago. Time moved differently in that realm. We were all there together, all us mirror travelers. Our consciousness is preserved like insects in amber. They spoke to me, these others, taught me, showed me truths I wasn't ready to understand. And eventually, they showed me how to return. Though they warned me I wouldn't come back unchanged. I emerged in the mirror 3 days later, according to the search party that found me huddled on the floor of the main chamber. The flash flood had indeed occurred, devastating the lower sections of the cave system. By all rational accounts, I should have drowned, trapped in that dead-end chamber. The search party seemed almost disappointed to find me alive. The locals among them wouldn't meet my eyes. One old man made a warning gesture when he thought I wasn't looking. They had questions, of course. Where'd I been for 3 days? How had I survived the flood? Why were my clothes completely dry when they found me? I gave them a story about finding a high pocket in the rock, waiting out the worst of the flooding. They pretended to believe me. I pretended not to notice their disbelief. The university terminated my contract shortly after. Budget constraints, they claimed, though I later learned they'd hired someone else within the week. My final report, detailing the chamber with its carvings and artifacts, was quietly shelved. When I followed up months later, I was told there was no record of such a chamber ever being documented. I tried to find it again, of course, returned to Wales the following summer with my own equipment. But the narrow passage off the main chamber was gone, collapsed in the flood, according to the new guide. No chance of excavation, given the instability of the entire eastern section. Only I know it wasn't collapsed. The way had been deliberately sealed. By whom or what, I can't say for certain. But sometimes I dream of those locals with their averted eyes and protected gestures. And I wonder how many generations they've served as guardians of that threshold. The most troubling thing, though, the changes. Small at first, heightened sensitivity to sound, occasional glimpses of those impossible colors in ordinary objects Dreams so vivid they left physical evidence behind. A feather on my pillow, mud on the sheets, water pooling on the floor, then less subtle effects. Electronics malfunction around me now. Mirrors sometimes show something else, lurking behind my reflection. And the rain, God, the rain. When it falls heavily, like tonight, I can hear them again, whispering, calling me back. Sometimes I find myself standing before mirrors in the dark, my fingers tracing their surface, feeling for that syrupy resistance that would tell me the way is open again. I've caught myself speaking in languages I don't know, reciting words a human vocal cords shouldn't be able to form. And I've begun carving symbols on the walls of my flat, concentric circles of them, matching those from the chamber. I don't plan to do it, just find myself completing another ring, the knife in my hand, with no memory of starting. They're coming through, you see, bit by bit, using me as their door. That's why I've asked you here tonight, why I've told you this story as the rain falls. I needed someone else to know, to understand what's happening, what's coming, and I needed someone to hold this. You feel its weight, don't you? The unusual warmth of the obsidian against your skin. They don't like being separated from it. I can hear them protesting even now, but I can't be trusted with it any longer. The circles are almost complete. The threshold grows stronger each day. Take it far from here. Bury it. Sink it in deep water. Whatever you do, don't look into its surface when it rains. Don't listen for the echoes of your own voice coming back wrong. And if you ever hear something calling your name when you're alone, when the rain is drumming against your windows and the power has gone out, something that sounds almost, but not quite, like a human voice, do what I failed to do. Don't answer. Run. Listen to the rain hitting the window. Soothing, isn't it? The steady rhythm, the gentle patter against glass. Safe inside while the world outside turns cold and wet. I've always loved rainy nights, found comfort in them, until last autumn. That is, now when I hear rain, particularly at night, I remember that stretch of country road in South Dakota. I remember the headlights cutting through sheets of water, the windscreen wipers fighting a losing battle, and most of all, I remember her, the woman who wasn't there. I was driving back to Minneapolis after a disappointing business trip to Rapid City. The Black Hills region had seemed like the perfect location for our company's team-building retreat. Scenic, isolated, with that rustic American charm our London office had specifically requested. But the venue I'd visited was dilapidated, the trails too rugged for our executives, and the nearest decent restaurant a full 30 minutes away. My boss wouldn't be pleased. To make matters worse, a storm system had moved in earlier than forecasted. My rental car's GPS estimated a 6-hour drive back to Minneapolis, where I could catch my flight home the following afternoon. The sensible decision would have been to stay another night in Rapid City and set off in the morning, but I'd already extended my trip by a day, and I had meetings scheduled for the day after my return to London. I thought I could manage the drive if I was careful. The first 2 hours were uneventful, if tense. The rain was heavy but consistent. The traffic light. I had the radio tuned to a local station playing classic rock, though the signal grew increasingly patchy as I moved further from civilization. By the time I reached the halfway point of my journey, somewhere east of Wall, the radio offered nothing but static and the occasional fragment of a voice too distorted to understand. The real trouble began when I missed a turning. The GPS recalculated, directing me onto smaller roads, still paved but narrow, with no streetlights and few reflective markers. The darkness pressing around my headlights, the rain now coming down in sheets. I could barely see 20 feet ahead. I should have turned back, found my way to the main highway again, but the GPS insisted this route was fastest, and I was tired, anxious to make progress. So I pressed on, my speed reduced to a crawl, knuckles white on the steering wheel. It was nearly midnight when I saw the figure on the roadside, a flash of pale color against the darkness, caught in my headlights for just an instant before I passed. A person, standing motionless in the pouring rain. I braked instinctively, then hesitated. This was the middle of nowhere. No houses nearby, no broken down vehicles that I could see, just empty grassland stretching into rain-swept darkness. What was someone doing out here at this hour, in this weather? Common sense warred with conscience. I was alone on a deserted road in a foreign country. Every horror film I'd ever seen advised against stopping. But then again, what if someone genuinely needed help? I checked my mirrors, seeing nothing but darkness. After a moment's deliberation, I put the car in reverse and slowly backed up until my headlights once again illuminated the figure. It was a woman. She stood perfectly still at the edge of the road, wearing what appeared to be a white dress, now soaked through and clinging to her thin frame. Her dark hair hung in wet ropes around her face, which was lowered, hidden from view. She didn't look up at my approach, didn't react to the headlights or the sound of my engine. I lowered my passenger window, just enough to call out, "Are you all right? Do you need help?" For several seconds, she didn't respond, didn't move at all. I was beginning to think she hadn't heard me over the rain when, slowly, she raised her head. I couldn't make out her features clearly through the rain and darkness. Just a pale oval of a face turned toward me. Her stillness was unnerving. No hunching against the rain. No arms wrapped around herself for warmth. Just that unnatural, patient stillness, as if she'd been standing there for hours, waiting. "Hello?" I called again. "Do you need a lift somewhere? A phone?" Another long pause before she responded. Her voice surprisingly clear despite the drumming rain. "I need to get home," she said. Not a request, not a plea. A simple statement of fact. "Where's home?" I asked, already reaching over to unlock the passenger door. "I can drop you at the nearest town." "East," she said. "Just keep driving east." A warning bell sounded in the back of my mind. This wasn't right. Normal people didn't stand motionless in midnight rainstorms. They didn't direct strangers to drive them east without specifying a destination. And yet, I couldn't just leave her there, could I? If something happened to her, if she died of exposure or was hit by another car, how would I live with myself? "Get in," I said, pushing the door open. "You're soaked through." She approached the car with the same unhurried movements, each step deliberate, as she folded herself into the passenger seat. I caught a stronger impression of her appearance. Young, perhaps mid-20s, with delicate features and very pale skin. Her dress was white as I first thought, but a light blue, though so drenched it appeared nearly colorless. She wore no jacket, no shoes, just a thin dress, plastered with skin that looked too white, almost bluish in the dim light of the car's interior. "You must be freezing," I said, turning the heater up. "There's a blanket in the back seat if you want it." She didn't respond, didn't reach for the blanket, just sat perfectly straight, hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Water dripped steadily from her hair, her dress, pooling on the leather seat. "I'm James," I offered, putting the car in drive and easing back onto the road. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she said after another of those uncomfortable pauses. "What happened, Sarah? Why were you out there? Did your car break down?" "I need to get home," she repeated, as if I hadn't spoken. "Keep driving east." The GPS was still directing me southeast, toward the interstate that would eventually take me to Minneapolis. I wondered if her home was along the way, or if I was making a detour, but she offered no clarification, and I found myself oddly reluctant to press for details. We drove in silence for several minutes. Nothing but the sound of rain and wipers between us. I snuck glances at her when I could. Despite the heater's warmth, she wasn't shivering. Wasn't moving at all, really, except for her eyes, which occasionally darted to the roadside as if searching for Are you American? I asked, desperate to break the uncomfortable silence. I'm from London myself, just here on business. I know what you are, she said, her voice so soft I barely heard over the rain. Something in her tone made my skin prickle. I focused on the road ahead, telling myself I'd misheard or that she'd meant nothing by it. Just an odd choice of words. How far to your home? I asked, glancing at the dashboard clock. It was past midnight now. Not far now, she murmured. We're getting close. Do you feel it? Feel what? The thinning, she said. The boundaries weaken in places like this, especially on nights like this. I didn't know how to respond to that. The conversation had taken a turn into the surreal, and I found myself wishing I'd trusted my initial instincts and kept driving. You're uncomfortable, she observed, turning to look at me properly for the first time. Don't be. You were meant to find me tonight. It's been arranged. Arranged by whom? The question came out more sharply than I'd intended. She smiled, a small, knowing curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. You wouldn't understand if I told you. Few do, until they've crossed over. The rain intensified suddenly, hammering against the roof with such violence I could barely hear myself think. The road ahead disappeared into a wall of water, forcing me to slow to a near crawl. We should stop, I said. Wait for this to ease up. I can barely see. No, she said, an edge entering her voice for the first time. We can't stop now. We're almost there. Almost where exactly? I demanded, patience wearing thin. You still haven't told me where I'm taking you. The crossing point, she said, as if it should be obvious. The place where the way opens. It only happens on certain nights, when the storm is right and the stars align. Tonight is such a night. I'd had enough. This woman was clearly unwell, possibly dangerous. I needed to find the nearest police station or hospital or any populated place where I could leave her with professionals. I reached for my phone to check the Maps app for nearby towns, but found the screen black and unresponsive. Dead, though I'd charge it fully before leaving Rapid City. Your devices won't work here, Sarah said mildly. We're in between now. In between what? I snapped, fear beginning to edge out concern. Worlds, she replied simply. States of being. Call it what you like. The road exists in both places for a time. During the crossing, I stepped on the brake, bringing the car to a complete stop in the middle of the empty road. I think you should get out now, I said, fighting to keep my voice level. I'm not comfortable with... Look, she interrupted, pointing through the windscreen. We've arrived. Despite myself, I looked through the curtain of rain. My headlight illuminated a bridge ahead, an old, narrow stone structure spanning what appeared to be a river swollen with rainwater. Beyond the bridge, the road continued into darkness. I don't understand, I said. What's special about this bridge? It's a threshold, she explained, suddenly animated. Can't you feel it? The vibration in the air? The way the rain hangs suspended for just a fraction too long. And to my horror, I realized I could feel it. A subtle wrongness in the atmosphere. A quality to the darkness beyond the bridge that seemed deeper than mere absence of light. The rain did seem to hesitate in its descent, as if fighting against some unseen resistance. Drive forward, Sarah urged, onto the bridge. I need to cross tonight, and I need a vehicle to do it. A vessel. Understanding dawned, cold and terrible. You were waiting for someone to drive by. I said, anyone would have done. She tilted her head, studying me with eyes that suddenly seemed too dark too deep. Not anyone, she corrected. It had to be someone not from here. Someone already between worlds themselves. A traveler passing through. Like you, James from London. I reached for the gear shifter, intending to reverse, to get as far from this bridge as possible. But my hand froze halfway. Not because Sarah had moved to stop me. She hadn't. But because I couldn't make myself complete the action. Some force held me immobile, my body no longer entirely my own. What are you doing to me? I whispered. Nothing you haven't allowed, she replied. You invited me in freely. You offered assistance freely. The rules require consent. I didn't consent to this. Didn't you? When you backed up to find me, when you unlocked your door, when you agreed to drive me east, each action was a choice freely made. My hand moved to the gear shift of its own accord, putting the car back in drive. My foot pressed the accelerator gently. We began rolling forward toward the bridge. What happens if we cross? I managed to ask, fighting uselessly against my body's betrayal. Everything changes, Sarah said, a note of longing in her voice. I return home after too long in exile, and you'll see what I've seen. Know what I know, the world behind the world. And if I refuse, she gave me that small, cold smile again. You already haven't. The front tires hit the bridge with subtle change in sound. The stone surface hummed beneath us. A vibration I felt in my teeth and my bones. The headlights seemed to dim, though the dashboard showed them on full power. What are you? I asked, no longer bothering to hide my fear. Sarah turned to look at me fully. As she did, her appearance shifted. Nothing dramatic, no monstrous transformation, but subtle details changed. Her skin lost its bluish pallor, gaining a healthy flush. Her hair dried instantly, styled in a way that would have been fashionable decades ago. Her dress, once sodden and clinging, was now simply elegant. A vintage design from perhaps the 1950s. Most disturbing of all, the rainwater that had been pooling in my passenger seat was gone, as if she'd never been wet at all, as if the rain had never touched her. I was like you once, she said, her voice warmer now, almost kind. A traveler who picked up the wrong passenger, who crossed when they shouldn't have. I've been trying to get back ever since. We were halfway across the bridge now. The humming intensified, and the rain was falling upward, drops rising from the river below to join the clouds above. Please, I begged, I don't want this. Few do at first, she acknowledged, but you'll understand soon, when we cross over, when you see. Her words cut off as headlights suddenly appear behind us, bright beams cutting through the rain. Another car, approaching the bridge from the same direction we had. Sarah's expression transformed into one of alarm. No, she hissed. They can't interfere. Not now. The car behind us flashed its high beams twice, then accelerated, drawing alongside us on the narrow bridge. A dangerous maneuver under any circumstances, but seemingly impossible given the bridge's width. Yet somehow the vehicle managed it. A dark SUV with tinted windows. As it pulled level with us, the passenger window rolled down. A man looked out, middle-aged, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen too much. He wore what appeared to be a park ranger's uniform. Stop the car, he called to me. Don't cross the midpoint. Sarah let out a sound that wasn't quite human, a hiss of frustration and fury. Ignore him, she commanded. Drive faster. We're almost there. My foot pressed harder on the accelerator, though I fought against it. The Ranger's SUV kept pace. She's not what she appears, the Ranger shouted over the rain. If you cross the midpoint with her, you'll never return. At least, not as yourself. Help me. I managed to call back. I can't stop the car. The Ranger nodded grimly, as if this was expected. He reached back into his vehicle and produced what looked like an old silver whistle. Before Sarah could react, he put to his lips and blew. I heard nothing. No sound emerged, yet the effect was immediate and startling. Sarah screamed, a sound of genuine agony, clutching her head as if in unbearable pain. The invisible force controlling my movements vanished. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding on the wet stone. We stopped inches in the center of the bridge, which was marked by a subtle change in the stonework, darker, older blocks giving way to newer repairs. The Ranger pulled his SUV across our path, blocking the way forward. He emerged, whistle still in hand, approaching my passenger side with careful steps. "Get out of the car," he instructed me, slowly. "Don't run." I didn't need to be told twice. I unbuckled my seatbelt and opened my door, the sound of the rain now deafening as it fell normally again. As I stepped onto the bridge, I felt the stone vibrating beneath my feet, a sensation like standing on a massive tuning fork. Sarah remained in the passenger seat, her form flickering now between the dry, elegant woman she briefly appeared to be and something else. Something I couldn't quite see clearly, as if my mind refused to process the image. "What is she?" I asked the Ranger, who had positioned himself between me and the car. "Not she," he corrected. It's not from around here." "I gathered that much," I said, a hysterical edge to my laugh. "Some kind of ghost." The Ranger shook his head. "Nothing so simple. There are entities that exist in the spaces between places, in the folds and cracks of reality. They find weak points, crossroads, bridges, cave entrances, and wait for someone to help them cross over fully into our world." "Why me? Why night?" "You're an outsider here," he explained. "A foreigner. It makes you more susceptible. And tonight," he glanced up at the rain. "The storm thins the boundaries, makes crossing easier." Inside my car, Sarah, or whatever it was, had stopped flickering. Her form stabilized, but not as the young woman I'd picked up. Her skin had turned gray and paper-thin, stretched too tight over a frame that seemed both emaciated and somehow wrong in its proportions. Her eyes had sunk deep into their sockets, glowing faintly with inner light. Her mouth, when she opened it to speak, revealed teeth too numerous and too sharp. "This isn't over," she said, her voice distorted now, layered with sounds no human throat could produce. "I've waited decades for a night like this, a vessel like him. I won't wait decades more." The Ranger raised his whistle again. "You've lost your chance. Return to your side and release your hold on the vessel." "And if I refuse?" she asked, using my own question against me. "Then I destroy the bridge," he said simply, "with you on it, trapped between, with no way to cross either direction, an eternity of nowhere." I couldn't tell if he was bluffing. The creature that had called itself Sarah apparently couldn't either. It glared at him for a long moment, then at me. "Remember this moment," it said to me, "when you stood at the threshold and glimpsed what lies beyond. Part of you wanted to see. Part of you still does." And the terrible thing was, it wasn't wrong. Despite my fear, despite the obvious danger, some small, curious part of me did wonder what lay on the other side of that bridge. What world or state of being this creature called home. "Another time," it said, almost gently. Then it simply unraveled. There's no other way to describe it. Its form came apart like threads of a tapestry, each fiber fading into the rain until nothing remained but an empty, wet passenger seat. The Ranger lowered his whistle, shoulders sagging with what looked like exhaustion. "Close one," he muttered. "Who are you?" I asked. "How did you know to find us here?" "Name's Ranger Walker," he said. "As for how I knew, let's just say I've been patrolling these roads for a long time. I know the signs, the conditions, when crossings are likely to be attempted. There are more like her? I couldn't keep the horror from my voice. More than you want to know about, he confirmed. Most folks drive right by them, protected by their disbelief, their unwillingness to stop. Those who do stop, he didn't need to finish the thought. I looked back at my car, suddenly reluctant to re-enter it. Walker seemed to understand. It's gone, he assured me. For now, but I'd advise getting off these back roads. Head straight to the interstate. Stick to populated areas for the rest of your journey. What was it really after? I asked. It said something about needing a vessel. Walker's expression darkened. They can't fully manifest in our world without displacing something that belongs here. If you crossed the midpoint with that thing, it would have taken your place, your body, your life. And me? What would have happened to me? He looked away, out into the rain. Best not to dwell on that. But I already knew I would have become like it. A thing between worlds, desperate for a way back, waiting by roadsides on rainy nights for unwary travelers. Walker walked me back to my car, checking the interior thoroughly before allowing me to get in. My phone suddenly came back to life. Screen illuminated with a flood of delayed notifications. Follow me, he said. I'll lead you to the highway. I did as instructed, my headlights fixed on his taillights, hands shaking on the steering wheel. True to his word, he led me to an interstate on-ramp about 20 minutes later. Before driving off, he pulled alongside me one last time. Word of advice, he called through his open window. When you're traveling unfamiliar roads, especially at night, especially in the rain, don't stop for strangers, no matter how harmless they seem, no matter how much your conscience tells you to help. I'll remember, I promise. He nodded, satisfied. Safe travels, then. I watched his SUV disappear into the rain before merging onto the interstate, comforted by the presence of other vehicles, the distant glow of civilization ahead. I made it to Minneapolis by dawn, exhausted but intact. I caught my flight home as planned, tried to put the entire incident behind me, told myself it had been a hallucination brought on by fatigue and the stress of driving in dangerous conditions. But on rainy nights like this, I know better. I know what waits on lonely roads in the places between. I know how thin the boundaries can become. And sometimes, when I'm driving alone at night and see a figure by the roadside, I feel the briefest urge to stop, to look directly at what most people drive right past, protected by their disbelief, to ask the questions whose answers lie just on the other side of that bridge. But I keep driving. I always keep driving. And if you're listening to this on a rainy night, headlights cutting through darkness on some lonely stretch of road, and you see a figure waiting patiently by the roadside, keep driving too. Some passengers are better left unpicked. The rain against my window tonight reminds me of that evening. It's been 3 years now, but I still wake up sometimes, heart racing, convinced I can hear footsteps in the wet soil outside my bedroom. Do you ever feel that way? That certain sounds can transport you instantly back to the worst moment of your life? I was a doctoral student back then, researching indigenous folklore in the American Midwest. My focus was on narratives that persisted across multiple tribes despite geographical separation. Stories that suggested common origins or experiences. My university had secured me a research grant to spend 6 months traveling through rural areas, recording oral histories from tribal elders and examining local archives. I'd been on the road for nearly 4 months when I arrived in the small town of Hollow Creek, just east of the Black Hills in South Dakota. It wasn't even a proper town, really, just a cluster of buildings surrounding a crossroads, population barely scraping into 3 digits. But it was positioned at the intersection of historical territories of 3 different tribes, making it potentially valuable for my research. The locals were polite, but reserved when I explained my purpose. Yes, there were some elders I could speak with. No, they didn't think there would be much of interest to me. Yes, there was a small bed and breakfast where I could stay. The proprietor, an elderly woman named Marlene, showed me to a sparse but clean room on the second floor and mentioned that dinner would be served at 6. That first evening, as I sat in the small dining room with the B&B's only other guest, a traveling salesman who seemed eager to leave town, Marlene mentioned almost casually that I'd arrive at an interesting time. The Hollow Festival starts tomorrow, she explained, refilling my water glass. Happens every autumn. Most important event in Hollow Creek. What kind of festival is it? I asked, immediately intrigued. Local celebrations often preserved elements of historical traditions. Exactly the sort of thing I was researching. Marlene hesitated. Just briefly enough that I almost missed it. Harvest Festival, mostly. Been going on longer than anyone can remember. There's a feast, some ceremonies in the old forest north of town. Nothing too exciting, but everyone attends. The salesman snorted softly. Everyone who doesn't know better. Marlene shot him a look that could curdle milk. He returned his attention to his plate. Would it be possible for me to attend? I asked, for my research? Another of those barely perceptible hesitations. I don't see why not. You're staying through the weekend anyway, aren't you? The festival's only one night. Before I could ask more questions, she changed the subject, inquiring about my plans for the following day. I mentioned the names of 2 tribal elders I hoped to interview, and she nodded approvingly, suggesting I visit the local historical society as well. Mary Blackwood runs it, she said. Got records going back to the first European settlements. Might have something on those folklore connections you're looking for. I thanked her for the suggestion and retired early, planning a full day of interviews and research before the festival in the evening. The next morning brought steady rain, gentle but persistent, the kind that seems like it could continue for days. I borrowed an umbrella from Marlene and made my way through the quiet streets to my first appointment. The tribal elder, a man in his 80s named Joseph White Eagle, received me in his small home at the edge of town. He was courteous but guarded, answered my questions about traditional stories with carefully considered responses that somehow managed to convey very little. When I mentioned I would be attending the Hollow Festival that evening, something changed in his demeanor, a subtle tightening around the eyes, a new stillness in his hands. Why would you want to do that? He asked. I'm interested in how local traditions preserve elements of older cultural practices. I explained. Festivals often contain rituals and symbols that have been passed down for generations, sometimes from pre-colonial times. He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with eyes that had seen nearly a century of changes. Some traditions, he finally said, are preserved for reasons beyond cultural heritage. Some continue because they must. What do you mean? He sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 80-plus years. The Hollow is old, older than my people, older than any people. We didn't create that ceremony. We inherited it, just as the white settlers inherited it from us. My researchers' instincts were immediately alert. This was potentially significant. A suggestion of pre-Columbian cultural transfer. Inherited from whom? I asked. That's the wrong question, he replied. The right question is, inherited why? For what purpose does a hollow continue, generation after generation, regardless of who lives in this place? Before I could press further, he stood, signaling that our interview was over. At the door, he touched my arm lightly. If you must attend tonight, keep to the edges. Don't participate. Don't eat the food. And whatever happens, don't enter the forest circle. His warning left me unsettled, but even more intrigued. I spent the rest of the morning at the Historical Society, where Mary Blackwood, a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s, helped me navigate their small but well-organized archives. I found several references to the Hollow Festival dating back to the mid-1800s, when European settlers first established a permanent community here. The descriptions were frustratingly vague. Annual ceremonies in the forest, community feasts, references to renewal and appeasement. What exactly are they appeasing? I asked Mary, showing her a journal entry from 1873 that mentioned the appeasement being successful this year. She closed the ledger I'd been examining with a decisive snap. Old-fashioned language, she said briskly. They meant the harvest, of course. Agricultural communities were always at the mercy of natural forces. Bad weather, poor crops. It's only natural they develop rituals to try to ensure good fortune. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation. So, why didn't I believe her? The rain continued throughout the day, sometimes easing to a drizzle, sometimes strengthening to a steady downpour. By late afternoon, when I returned to the B&B to change the evening's festival, the ground was thoroughly saturated. Every depression, Marlene provided me with a heavy raincoat, better than that flimsy umbrella for tonight, and directions to the festival grounds, about a half-mile north of town where the houses gave way to dense forest. Follow the lanterns, she instructed. They'll be lit by now, marking the path. The food will be under tents, but the ceremony itself, well, that happens regardless of weather. I thanked her and headed out into the early evening gloom. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm, not heavy but persistent. Drops tapping against my borrowed raincoat in a sound not unlike gentle finger drumming. The daylight was fading rapidly, but as Marlene had promised, lanterns had been placed at intervals along the narrow dirt road leading into the forest, each one casting a small sphere of warm light against the deepening shadows. As I approached the tree line, I began to hear sounds carrying through the wet air, voices, music, the crackling of what must have been a substantial bonfire despite the rain. The path curved, and suddenly I emerged into a large clearing where it seemed the entire population of Hollow Creek had gathered. The scene was visually striking. A series of large canvas tents had been erected around the edges of the clearing, sheltering tables laden with food and drink. Dozens of lanterns hung from poles and low-hanging branches, creating islands of light throughout the space. In the center of the clearing stood the bonfire I'd heard, somehow burning fiercely despite the continuous rain, a massive pyramid of logs easily 15 feet high, flames leaping toward the darkened sky. Most remarkable of all was the edge of the forest surrounding the clearing. The trees here were ancient, their massive trunks and spreading canopies suggesting centuries of growth. They were arranged with an unnatural precision, forming a perfect circle around the open space, their branches intertwining overhead to create what appeared to be a living dome. Despite the rain falling everywhere else, the ground beneath this natural canopy remained largely dry. People moved throughout the space, greeting each other, filling plates with food, drinking from pottery cups. Children darted between adults, playing some kind of game involving the lantern poles. At first glance, it appeared to be exactly what Marlene had described, a typical harvest festival, unremarkable except for its atmospheric setting. But as I moved further into the clearing, I began to notice discordant details. The food on the tables wasn't the typical fare I'd expect. No casseroles or pies or fried chicken. Instead, there were arrangements of wild mushrooms, dark bread studded with what looked like seeds and nuts, and large clay bowls filled with a thick, red stew that steamed in the cool air. The drink being served wasn't beer or cider, but cloudy liquid poured from stone jugs. The music, too, was strange, produced by instruments I couldn't immediately identify, creating melodies that seemed to hover just at the edge of recognizable patterns before veering into progressions that made something in my chest tighten uncomfortably. And the people, something about their movements felt choreographed, as if they were all following a script they'd rehearsed many times before. Their conversations, their laughter, their seemingly casual interactions, all had an undercurrent of deliberateness, of ritual. I kept to the periphery as Joseph had advised, observing rather than participating. No one approached me directly, though I received numerous glances, some curious, others vaguely concerned, a few actively hostile. I noted that while most residents were present, not everyone seemed equally involved. Some, particularly the older members of the community, took more active roles, directing others, overseeing preparations. Others, mainly younger adults, appeared to be going through the motions, their enthusiasm clearly forced. As full darkness descended, the character of the gathering began to shift. The children were ushered back toward town by a group of teenagers who did not return. The music changed, becoming more rhythmic, dominated by percussion. People stopped eating and drinking, forming a large circle around the bonfire. One man stepped forward. The mayor, I'd been told earlier, though I hadn't caught his name. He raised his hands, and the music ceased. "The time has come," he announced, his voice carrying clearly despite the continued patter of rain. "As it has always come, as it will always come. The hollow awaits." A murmur passed through the crowd, not excitement or anticipation, but something closer to resignation. The circle parted, and for the first time, I noticed a gap in the ring of ancient trees, a pathway leading deeper into the forest. Lanterns marked this path as well, but these emitted a different quality of light. Not the warm yellow of the clearing's illumination, but a pale, green-tinged glow that seemed to waver and pulse. From this pathway emerged three figures wearing elaborate masks carved from what appeared to be wood, painted in faded colors and adorned with feathers, bones, and small animal skulls. Their bodies were draped in layers of rough-spun fabric, hands and feet wrapped in leather bindings. Each carried a staff topped with a lantern matching those that lined the forest path. "The guides have come," the mayor intoned. "They will lead us to the hollow." The masked figures took positions at equal points around the circle. One of them raised their staff, tilting the lantern so that its greenish light spilled over the assembled villagers. Where the light touched, people stepped forward, 8 in total, 4 men and 4 women, ranging in age from perhaps 20 to 60. I realized with a cold jolt that this was some form of selection process. The second masked figure raised their lantern, its light sweeping the crowd, selecting 8 more people. Then the third did the same. 24 people now stood separated from the rest, arranged in 3 groups of 8. Their expressions ranged from grim acceptance to barely concealed terror. No one protested, though several exchanged what appeared to be farewell glances with family members remaining in the main group. The mayor approached each of the selected individuals, painting a symbol on their foreheads with a dark substance that glistened wetly in the firelight. From my position at the edge of the clearing, I couldn't make out the precise shape, but it appeared to be the same intricate spiral I'd seen in some of the Historical Society's oldest documents. "The chosen will enter the hollow," the mayor announced. "There they will make the offering, as we have done since time immemorial. Through their sacrifice, balance is maintained." Sacrifice? I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain or the night air. Surely this was symbolic language, a ritual dramatization of agricultural offering, but the faces of the chosen suggested otherwise. They looked like people being led to their execution. I knew I should leave, return to town, perhaps even contact authorities. But academic curiosity rooted me in place. I had to see what would happen next, to understand what this ceremony actually entailed. The 3 masked guides turned and proceeded back to the gap in the trees, each leading their group of 8 along the green-lit path. The mayor and the remaining villagers formed a procession behind them, moving with slow, measured steps. I hesitated only briefly before falling in at the very back of the procession. telling myself I would maintain a safe distance, ready to retreat at the first sign of genuine danger. The path wound through the forest, narrowing as we progressed, so that eventually we were walking single file. The trees pressed close on either side, their branches forming a tunnel overhead that somehow kept the rain at bay despite the continuing sound of water striking leaves above us. After perhaps 10 minutes of walking, the path opened into another clearing, smaller than the first and perfectly circular. Unlike the festival grounds, no tents or tables stood here. The space was empty except for a ring of stone pillars, 9 of them, each about 7 feet tall, arranged around what appeared to be a depression in the ground at the center of the clearing. The procession filed in, the villagers arranging themselves in concentric circles around the stone pillars. The 3 guides led their selected groups to stand before specific pillars, positioning them with careful precision. From my position at the edge of the clearing, I could now see that what I'd taken for a depression was actually an opening, a perfectly circular hole perhaps 15 feet in diameter, its edges lined with fitted stone that disappeared into darkness below. The hollow, I presumed, some kind of natural sinkhole or cave entrance, incorporated into local mythology and ritual. The mayor stepped forward, standing at the edge of the opening. "Since before memory," he began, his voice carrying the cadence of oft-repeated liturgy, "we have maintained the covenant. What dwells below must be appeased. What hungers must be fed. The balance must be preserved. The balance must be preserved." The assembled villagers echoed. The rain, which had been our constant companion throughout the evening, suddenly intensified, dropped striking the canopy above with such force that a fine mist began to penetrate the leafy ceiling, enveloping the clearing in a ghostly haze. And then the sound changed. The rainfall continued, but beneath it came a new sound, a deep, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to emanate from the opening in the ground. I felt it more than heard it, a vibration that traveled up to the soles of my feet and resonated in my chest cavity. The masked guides began to move, circling the stone pillars in a complex pattern, their staffs leaving trails of greenish light in the mist. The 24 selected villagers remained motionless, their faces now slack, eyes fixed on the darkness of the opening. The thrumming intensified, resolving into a pattern that almost suggested language. Not words I could understand, but communications nonetheless, questions and responses, demands and acknowledgments. The mayor was speaking now too, his voice joining this strange communion, using words that weren't quite English but that I somehow understood on some primal level. He was negotiating. That realization hit me with absolute clarity. This was not merely a symbolic ritual or cultural tradition. The mayor was actively bargaining with something that dwelled beneath the forest floor. I must have made some involuntary sound of shock, because several heads turned in my direction. One of the masked guides broke from their pattern, approaching me with deliberate steps. Up close, I could see that the mask was far older than I'd initially thought. It was darkened with age, the paint faded to ghostly suggestions of original colors. Through the eye holes, I glimpsed not eyes but darkness, as if nothing existed behind the mask at all. "You do not belong here, observer," the guide said, their voice surprisingly normal, with a slight accent I'd noted in many older Hollow Creek residents. "Yet you have witnessed what few outsiders have seen. This complicates matters." "I'm sorry," I stammered. "I'm a researcher. I was invited to the festival." "To the feast, perhaps. Not to the Hollow." "Never to the Hollow." The guide tilted their head, studying me. "But now that you are here, perhaps there is purpose in it. The offering this year has been insufficient. The hunger grows." Before I could process the implications of these words, a disturbance broke out near the central opening. One of the selected villagers, a young man perhaps in his early 20s, had broken from his position and was attempting to flee. He made it only a few steps before collapsing to his knees, clutching his head in apparent agony. The thrumming from below intensified, now accompanied by a scent that filled the clearing, musty, organic, reminiscent of soil after rain, but with undertones of something metallic and sharp. "It comes," the guide beside me whispered, stepping back to rejoin the circle. The opening in the ground was no longer empty darkness. Something was rising from below, not emerging fully, but extending upward like a searching tendril. In the green-tinged lantern light and misty rain, I couldn't discern its exact nature. It seemed simultaneously solid and vaporous, holding a definite shape while constantly shifting within that form. What I could perceive clearly was its effect on the chosen villagers. As the entity rose higher, they began to move toward the opening, steps mechanical, eyes fixed on the apparition. The young man who had tried to flee was now crawling toward it, tears streaming down his face even as his body propelled itself forward against his will. "The first 8 approach," the mayor intoned. "As agreed, as promised. 8 to sustain, 8 to preserve, 8 to silence." The first group, led by their masked guide, reached the edge of the opening. Without hesitation, without sound, they stepped forward one by one and disappeared into the darkness below. There was no splash, no impact, just the simple, terrible fact of their absence where moments before 8 human beings had stood. A sound emerged from the opening then, not quite a sigh, not quite a growl, but something that conveyed both satisfaction and continued hunger. The tendril-like protrusion expanded, grew more defined. I could now make out appendages, structures that resembled limbs but jointed in impossible ways, surfaces that shifted between what looked like bark, fur, and something like wet stone. "The second 8 approach," the mayor continued. "As agreed, as promised. 8 to nourish, 8 to strengthen, 8 to blind." The second group moved forward. Their guide positioned them at the edge. Like the first, they stepped into nothingness without resistance, vanishing into the maw of whatever ancient entity dwelled below Hollow Creek. The tendril now filled nearly the entire opening, aspect of its form suggesting features that my mind couldn't properly interpret. Structures that might have been eyes or mouths or sensory organs unlike anything that had evolved on Earth's surface. "The third 8 approach," the mayor said, his voice now trembling slightly. "As agreed, as promised. 8 to complete, 8 to seal, 8 to forget." The final group moved to the edge, but as they did, the entity below seemed to hesitate, its form contracting slightly. The thrumming changed tone, becoming sharper, more insistent. The mayor's face drained of color. "It is not satisfied," he whispered, loud enough for me to hear. "The hunger has grown beyond the traditional offering." The masked guide who had spoken to me earlier turned in my direction once more. "The observer," they said, voice carrying across the now silent clearing. Unexpected but present. Not bound by covenant, but witness to it. The balance demands adjustment. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. I began backing away, seeking the path we'd entered by, but found my retreat blocked by villagers who had silently repositioned behind me. "No," I said, finding my voice at last. "I'm not part of this. I don't consent to whatever this is." "Consent is immaterial," the mayor replied, his tone apologetic but firm. "The Hollow takes what the Hollow requires. It has done so since before human memory, before human presence in these lands. We merely manage the process, ensure its efficiency. Better 8 willingly offered than dozens taken in the night. Or hundreds," an elderly woman added, "as happened before the covenant was established." "You're sacrificing people," I said, try to appeal to any sense of humanity that might remain in these people. Actual human beings. This is murder. It is survival, the mayor countered. Not just ours, but yours as well. What sleeps beneath the Hollow extends far beyond this place. Its hunger, if left unsated, would not remain confined to our small community. The thrumming from below intensified, the sound now painful in its resonance. The tendril-like protrusion began moving, extending beyond the opening, reaching into the clearing itself. Where it touched the ground, the soil blackened and steamed despite the rain. I made a desperate break then, shoving past 2 surprised villagers and sprinting for what I hoped was a path back to town. I made it perhaps 20 yards before something caught my ankle. Not a hand, but something cold and rough, like stone given impossible flexibility. I fell hard, the breath knocked from my lungs, and felt myself being dragged backward across the wet ground. Panic gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. I kicked frantically, connecting with something that yielded then tightened its grip. Fingers scrabbling in the mud, I managed to grasp a fallen branch, using it to strike blindly behind me. There was a sound, not quite a cry, but a vibration that suggested pain or at least irritation, and the grip on my ankle momentarily loosened. I pulled free and scrambled to my feet, abandoned any thought of finding the path, and simply ran into the darkest part of the forest, away from the lanterns, away from a hollow. Behind me, voices called out an alarm, and I heard the mayor shouting instructions. The thrumming grew louder, seeming to come from the ground itself now, vibrating through tree roots and soil. I ran blindly, branches whipping my face, underbrush tearing at my clothes, the borrowed raincoat catching on thorns and nearly pulling me off balance. I have no clear memory of how long I ran, or the exact path I took. The forest seemed to go on forever, the darkness absolute now that I was far from any artificial light. The rain continued, soaking through my clothing, plastering my hair and my skull, running into my eyes and obscuring what little visibility remained. At some point, I collided with a fallen tree, the impact sending me sprawling into a shallow stream bed swollen with rainwater. The cold shock of it brought a moment of clarity. I lay still listening. The forest had gone silent. No thrumming, no voices, no sound pursuit. Just the steady patter of rain and the soft gurgle of water flowing around me. Had I escaped, or had they simply given up the chase, returned to their ceremony with the third group of sacrifices? I didn't wait to find out. Getting slowly to my feet, I picked a direction and began walking, no longer running but moving as quickly and quietly as I could manage on shaking legs. Eventually, after what felt like hours, I glimpsed lights ahead. Not the eerie green glow of the ritual lanterns, but the yellow illumination of ordinary electric streetlights. I'd somehow circled back to Hollow Creek. I kept to the shadows, avoiding the main street, making my way to the small motel at the edge of town rather than returning to Marlene's B&B. The night clerk, a bored teenager clearly uninvolved with the forest activities, barely glanced at my mud-covered appearance as he handed over room key in exchange for cash. I spent the night with a chair propped against a door handle, jumping at every sound, convinced that at any moment the mayor or the masked guides would come for me. By dawn, when no one had appeared, I gathered my few possessions and left town, abandoning my research materials and several personal items. I drove nonstop for hours, putting as much distance as possible between myself and Hollow Creek. When I finally stopped at a roadside diner 2 states away, I pulled out my phone to report what I'd witnessed, only to find all my photos and recordings from the previous day corrupted beyond recovery. Even my notes, stored in a cloud-based app, had been reduced to gibberish. It was as if Hollow Creek had reached through digital space to erase any evidence of its secrets. I considered reporting the incident to authorities anyway, but what would I say? That a small town was conducting human sacrifices to appease some ancient entity living underground? Without evidence, it would sound like the ravings of an unstable mind. In the end, I abandoned my doctoral research entirely, changing my academic focus to something safer, more conventional. I told myself I was being rational, that perhaps the stress of months on the road had caused me to misinterpret what I'd seen. Perhaps the entire experience had been some elaborate psychological experiment or community theatrical tradition that my overtired brain had processed as reality. But I know what I saw, what I felt, what nearly took me into the darkness beneath the forest floor. 3 years have passed. I've established a comfortable academic career far from South Dakota, published papers on entirely different subjects, created a life that bears no connection to that rainy night in Hollow Creek. Yet every autumn, as the leaves change and the first cold rains arrive, I find myself checking news sources for any mention of that tiny community. There's never anything. No reports of missing persons, no investigations, no disturbances of any kind. Hollow Creek remains unremarkable, unmemorable, deliberately overlooked. Sometimes I wonder if I should have done more, tried harder to expose what happens there. But then I remember the mayor's words about the covenant, about what happened before it was established, about hunger not confined to one small community. And I wonder perhaps the residents of Hollow Creek, for all their horrific practices, are maintaining a balance far more important than I can comprehend. If their sacrifices, medieval and monstrous as they seem, are preventing something much worse. The rain is falling harder now. Droplets strike in my window with increasing urgency. In that rhythm, if I listen carefully, I can almost make out a pattern. Almost, but not quite, like the thrumming that rose from beneath the forest floor. I tell myself it's just rain. Just water falling from the sky. Nothing more. But tonight, as on many rainy nights, I'll check that my doors are locked. I'll avoid looking too long into dark corners or reflective surfaces. And I'll whisper a quiet apology to those 24 people who walked into darkness, so that the rest of us could live in the light. Because I know the truth now. A truth I suspect humanity has always known in its oldest memories, its most primal fears. There are ancient things in this world, things that hunger, things that must be appeased. And somewhere in a forest clearing, as the autumn rains begin, the people of Hollow Creek are preparing their offerings once again.